Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first edition of Conversation School LAMPA in 2022, as well as the first edition in English language. My name is Leoda Prūse, and I'm the host of Conversation School LAMPA. And the reason for today's lecture being in English is that we are very happy to welcome Kajs Alhanens, a Finnish researcher and philosopher and a leader of Dialogu Akadēmijas, for this lecture, where he has promised us to explain how can we create a good dialogue. Kajs Alhanens is really made dialogue his passion, I would say, and his research subject. He's published several articles about this topic. He's been a senior advisor creating a dialogue method called timeout dialogue that has been used in Finland and abroad as a tool in different dialogues in the society, in the public sector, in private sector. And we're very happy that Kajs has joined us today. But before we start, I would like to really encourage you to ask questions to Kajs, to use this opportunity to do so. And please feel free to use Facebook comment section, or you will see that there's a link for the application Slido where you can also ask your question. The code and the link you will find in the comment section of this Facebook Live. As well, I would like to thank DUETS, the Foundation for Open Society, the creator of Conversation School LAMPA, as well as State Cultural Capital Foundation, who has been a long-time supporter for this school. Kajs, I would like to give the floor to you and really try to explain us different perks and different usages of dialogue, and how can we also enrich our skills and in the dialogue, in the art of dialogue, I would say. Please, Kajs, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Leoda. It's a very, very great pleasure to be here and explain and tell my ideas and my understanding of what is dialogue and how can we create a good dialogue. First of all, just to say something very quickly of where I come from, as Leoda already said something about it, but also I could add some things, and also to my relationship to LAMPA. So I come from Finland. I live in Helsinki, where I work as a leader of Dialogu Akadēmijas. I'm also a researcher in political philosophy. I will tell you a little bit more about my background in general soon. And I had the great pleasure to visit the LAMPA festival in the summer of 2019. And I was also able to return to Latvia this last autumn, when I visited Riga and also Ventspils, and again around the topic of dialogue. So it's very, very nice to be here again with you to talk about dialogue. I will give a lecture first, which will take less than 1 hour usually. And in the middle, there's also time to ask questions and give comments to what I'm telling you about. And then we'll have more than 30 minutes, hopefully, time to share thoughts, you can ask more questions or just give comments or present your points of view to the topic. Okay, so I'll just start. I have some slides that I will show you, and I'm hopefully able to share my screen with you right now. Leoda, do you see my screen now?
Yes, everything's visible.
Okay, great. So as I said, my topic is how to create a good dialogue. I will give first a bit more broader view to the topic of dialogue in general, especially how dialogue is connected to democracy. And then I will go to a more concrete and practical approach. What does dialogue mean in practice? So my lecture is kind of divided in 3 sections. First, I will explain a little bit more about my professional background so you know where I come from. And then I come to the democracy part, and finally I come to the practical part. Okay, so something about my background. Laide already mentions that I work as a leader of Dialogu Academy. Dialogu Academy is part of Aretai, which is a small company of 8 people. We work in different parts of Finland, mostly in the southern part of Finland, but also more and more in the north at the moment, actually. Most of our work is done with different professionals in the public sector of Finland. So teachers, social workers, staffs in hospitals, people in the municipality administrations, but also we work with different companies and cultural organizations and universities. So great variety of different organizations and professionals that we work with. And our main thing that we do is that we try to help individuals, leaders, teams, work communities to be better at dialogue. And in Dialogu Academy, we provide different trainings for people who want to learn more and go deeper into different skills of dialogue. But I also have a background as a researcher in universities. I'm a researcher in political philosophy, originally from the University of Helsinki, but I have worked in different universities in Finland. And I have published 4 books in English, and 2 of the most relevant ones for this lecture are the ones that you see here, Dialogue in Democracy and Dialogical Supervision, which is a book that I have written together with my colleagues. Okay, so maybe this is enough for my background, where I come from. Maybe I would just like to emphasize that when I'm talking about dialogue, I try to combine the very practical work that we have done with our clients for 20 years in Aretai and Dialogu Academy, but also something from my research as in political philosophy, where I mostly focus on the questions around democracy and democracy as a way of life, not so much as a system of government, but as a way of life. And I'm going to tell you something about that as well. Okay. So let's start about democracy. Usually when we talk about democracy and think about democracy, we think democracy on a political level. We think it as a system of government, which basically means that the people of the country, of the political society, are using their rights as citizens to elect the people who lead them and who make decisions for them. But from the very early on in the history of democracy, all the way to the ancient Athens, in ancient Greek, democracy was not just a system of government. It was also seen and understood as a moral way of life. And what does that mean in practice? Well, in practice, a democratic way of life can be defined as a way of living together in all kinds of communities, like families, neighborhoods, workplaces, hobby, free time activities, municipal administrations, whatever kind of level in society can be practicing democratic way of life. Meaning that in those communities, groups, and societies, people try to live together in a way that maximizes the 2 core values of democracy, which are equality, that we try to treat everybody as equals, meaning that we try to see them as valuable members of the community where we live with them or act with them, and having the same value as us. So we try to maximize equality, but we also try to maximize freedom. And in democracy, freedom usually means individual freedom. The freedom that meaning that we try also aim at respecting people's individual choices, their individual ways of seeing the world, their individual ways of forming opinions about the topics that we deal together with them. So we try to maximize equality and freedom. And the word maximize here is crucial because, as we know, it's not something that happens in a 100% level. But depending on the situation, we try to do it as much as possible. We try to maximize equality and freedom. And the idea, and this is also something that the ancient Greek democratic societies in the ancient Greece also understood, is that if we are somehow successful in combining in this democratic way of life, individual people's different abilities, their skills, their knowledge, we can create flourishing society. So it's not just the idea that, okay, it's good to live in this way because we value equality and freedom. It is also an idea that this is the thing that makes societies flourish, makes them able to deal with complex issues, makes them able to find solutions to difficult questions and difficult tensions, and also helps people to maximize their capabilities as living human beings. And this, again, can be happen in family, it can happen in school, it can happen in workplaces, and different levels of society. But the crucial understanding has been throughout the history of democracy also that this kind of way of life is not easy. It's not very easy always respect other people's equality and their individual freedoms. And especially in situations where we are dealing with difficult questions, where we have very, very different opinions about those questions and lots of strong emotions, this way of life becomes very demanding. So democratic way of life is also something that we need to practice. We need to become democratic citizens through participating in this democratic way of life, both in private situations, like in family, schools, workplaces, but also in public, where we come together to different public forums and we participate in the politics or decision-making or discussion processes of our communities and our society. So it's always practicing, and it's practicing very, very concrete skills, how to act with other people in a democratic way. And my understanding is that the core of this democratic way of life is a dialogical form of discussion, which I will explain soon what I mean by dialogue more specifically. And the reasons why I think dialogue is so crucial for democracy and democratic way of life is that it helps to build trust between people. Because as we know, especially in this situation that we are living at the moment with all these big crises in all our societies, trust is not easy to gain. There are so much misunderstandings, there's so much hatred, there's so much disagreements about things. So it's very difficult at the moment to really trust other people who are living with me. So we need to do something active to build trust between people. But also I think it's crucial that, that through dialogue, we can also help individual people to feel that they have value for the community, that they are part of the group or the community that they're living in. And they are valuable part of community because they are different from each other. I think there are lots of situations in all our groups and societies where we feel that in order to be valuable for this group, I need to be very much similar to other people. I need to think the same way. I need to hold the same opinions. I need to agree what they are saying, what the other people are saying or what they're doing. So in order to be valuable, I need to be not so much as an individual. It's more that I need to be kind of a part of the mass or part of the group. But through dialogue and through democratic way of life, we can try to create situations and try to create a way of life where we value the differences of individuals. And we think that because we do see world in a different way and we do have different opinions, that is exactly the reason why we can be also valuable for the whole community. But again, this is not very easy, so we need to practice in order to find this way of and learn this way of being together. And maybe I say one more thing about this, this way of understanding democracy, coming back to the political level, because the idea of how this political system of government and this way of life relate to each other is also very crucial, because in order for this political democracy to function very well, we need that the people are quite well practiced and very able also in this democratic way of life. So, because if we think of especially representative democracy, where we select other citizens to make the decisions for us and work in the administration, those are the very same citizens that live in families and neighborhoods and work communities. So for them to be capable to act wisely in government level or municipality level or some other tasks, they need to have the skills already quite well developed, how to live in a democracy. So the basic understanding is that these two, the political system and the moral way of life, are very, very tightly dependent on each other. Okay, so it's something that needs to be practiced constantly. Well, this is the background of democracy, and I emphasize that I think that the core of the democratic way of life is dialogue. So what is then dialogue? First of all, of course, dialogue is in English language and also in many other languages, it is kind of a commonly used word, just meaning more or less a discussion of two or more people. And especially in Finland, if I look at the newspapers or different books where they mention the word dialogue, they usually also use the word dialogue in a sense that it means that it's some kind of a good quality discussion. But again, it doesn't really give much more specific content to the word of dialogue. So what we have tried to do, and this is something that comes through my research, is that we have tried to give a more definite frame and content to the word dialogue and the concept of dialogue. And this slide tries to make it as simple as possible without making it too obvious. So when I'm talking about dialogue, I mean a very specific kind of conversation, a very specific discussion that people are having. And this discussion, if it's dialogue, it is aiming at better understanding. So we come together with other people just to have a conversation where we focus on understanding, which means basically that we're focused on learning. And there are three crucial dimensions in this understanding that we are trying to gain through dialogue. First of all, there is a topic. We come together to talk about some topic that we want to understand better. And the topic of dialogue can be more or less anything. If we look at the historical documents of dialogues that we, for example, have from ancient Greece and ancient Rome, they were usually about some very relevant values for the society, like dialogues on justice, dialogues on courage, dialogues about friendship, but also dialogues about love, aging, various big important values and things in our human life and in our society. But in addition to these big topics, we could also have dialogues about very, very small and concrete things, like in a school, school class with pupils and the teacher. They could have a dialogue about what they think about good learning, or they could have a dialogue about some particular thing that happened in the class yesterday or the previous week. Like what they could have a dialogue that what happened last Tuesday when they start to have a really big argument during the biology class. And they could come together again and try to understand, okay, what happened last Tuesday when we had the argument? So that is the topic level. The other level or dimension is that we are also having a dialogue in order to understand other people. And I think this is something that really changes the approach in the discussion when we are aiming at dialogue. Because in a dialogue, we are trying to understand other people from the perspective that how they are different from me. How I'm interested in understanding how the other people or some other person in the dialogue sees the same thing, the same topic differently from me. And it's precisely because I think the other people are individuals and their point of view are different. That's for me a way to improve my understanding. Because if everybody would see the situation, the topic in the same way, I couldn't have a better understanding of it. It's only through other people that I can learn more and through their way of seeing the same thing differently. And the third dimension is that in a dialogue, we are also trying to understand ourselves better. We are there to talk about the topic, to hear how other people are seeing the topic, how do they understand it. But at the same time, we are there to try to see that, okay, what is my point of view? Why do I see this topic in this way? And also for what are the reasons behind it? And usually I become much more aware of my very unique way of seeing things when I hear other people talking about it from their own point of view. So in this sense, one could say that dialogue is very, very different from other forms of discussion and conversations that we also need in democracy. And I usually want to emphasize the differences, especially between dialogue and debating, and dialogue and negotiation. Because when we are debating, we are mostly having the debate in order to find out who has the best arguments and what are the best arguments. So we're kind of trying there to test the arguments that we have and find out which ones are the best ones. And when we are having a negotiation, we are then trying to find solutions and we are aiming at some sort of agreement with other people. We are there to make propositions. How should we act in the future? Or ways to solve some problem or some question that we really are trying to deal with together. But dialogue is different from these because in a dialogue, we don't need to know who has the best arguments. Only the thing that we need to do is we try to understand, even though I would think that somebody else has a really, really bad argument. In a dialogue, I don't try to force my argument to this person. I'm just there trying to understand better why the other people, this other person, why is he or she thinking this way? What is the reason? What are the experiences behind their point of view? So I can understand the topic better, but also other people better, and also myself. And I'm not there in a dialogical discussion. We are not there to find any agreement. And this comes to the third point also, that we don't need to reach a consensus. We don't need to agree. In the end of dialogue, we don't need to agree on things. It's enough that we just have gained better understanding. And I think that one of the reasons why we don't have so much dialogue in our society is that we don't really learn these differences between these different ways of communicating. Especially when I went to school in Finland, nobody told me anything that there actually are different ways of having communications with people, and they aim at different things. I did learn something about debating. We had practices of debating, and maybe we did learn something about negotiations, but we definitely didn't hear anything about dialogue as a very different way and specific way of having conversations with other people. I've learned it much later, and it's been much more painful. I think it would have been so much easier if I had learned it already in school. Okay, so this is more or less the kind of a ground where we come when we're thinking of dialogue. And I would like to ask Lady, if there are any questions or comment at the moment, either from the participants or from you.
Yeah, thank you, Kai, for the introduction. Yes, there are a few questions, and I think the main question that pops out and repeats itself in a way is that, of course, as you already touched upon, this is a very challenging time for democracy itself. And the dialogue as a form of communication isn't the most natural way that we are right now communicating in the society. Is there any idea or something that you would say, you have an idea how to make dialogue attractive in this sort of situation that we're in right now? And how can we still keep this as something that some form of communication that is still attractive to people?
Yeah. Very good question, and a very tricky one at the moment. In my understanding and in my experience, I think that we actually do have quite a lot of people who would like to be in dialogical discussions, but they just don't know where those conversations happen. So I think there is it is difficult at the moment, and people are mostly, I suppose, because we are stressed out, we are anxious about these problems that we are having, and we are afraid. So we tend to go to this very kind of a reactive position where we start to argue quite easily. So I think one way of making dialogue attractive is just to explain to people that, okay, we can actually try to have a different way of discussing these things. Because I think one of the problems is that people don't really know enough about dialogue. They are not attracted to it so much because they don't actually know. They hope that there could be a better way of having discussions, but they don't really know what it would mean. And one of the reasons why we developed the timeout method for dialogue in Finland was to kind of try to make it as concrete and simple for people, so they would understand that, okay, this actually there is a way of having a conversation also from a difficult topic without making it an argument. So one way of making dialogue attractive is to try to explain to people what it could mean. And I think another way is also that, even though I suppose it's quite obvious, but I think we have to stop and reflect and also discuss what's going to happen to us if we don't start having more dialogues. We need to point out that without dialogue, we will cause so much damage in our societies, and we are causing so much damage. And also without dialogue, we are taking a path that, you know, eventually will end up in a very, very bad place. And the crucial and the difficult thing is that if we go to that path, if we keep on having these very non-constructive, heated, polarizing discussions, we might end up more and more in a situation where it's really, really difficult to come back to have a dialogue. So we should start to do it quite as soon as possible. And so I think it's really, really important to also stop and reflect and talk about what's going to happen if we don't manage to start a dialogue. What are the bad consequences? Because I think there are several of them. I had something third in my mind also about making dialogue attractive. I think in general, one of the problems is that I suppose it's the same probably in Latvia as it's in Finland, that there are so many people who have never been in a proper dialogical discussion. They don't even know about the experience. So one way of making it attractive is to try to give people some opportunities to experience some kind of dialogue. It doesn't necessarily have to be a perfect dialogue or the most amazing dialogue, but a dialogue that gives people the understanding and feeling that, okay, we can actually do this. We can come here, we can sit down together and we can listen to each other and we can actually improve our understanding. And I think that is enough to begin with it, because usually my experience after training hundreds and I suppose thousands of people in Finland is that when people really first experience it, then they start to want more and they start to find places where they actually can in their own life, where they can actually try to practice dialogues more. And my suggestion and my advice is usually that start having dialogues first, maybe with people that are not so much in disagreement. Maybe it's not the wisest thing first to try to bring those people together who will end up having arguments. Try first practicing dialogue even within those groups of people that are not yet fighting with each other. Because I think the more you practice it, then the better you get at it, and then you will be able to do it more even with people that you are in a disagreement with. So basically just tell about dialogue, try to give a concrete example, what it means, what are the benefits of it, and what are the consequences if we don't have it, and then invite people to dialogues and try to give them good experiences. Not very easy still, but I don't know. I mean, there are no easy solutions at the moment.
Thank you, Kai. Exactly. I know this is quite a difficult question to ask, and thank you for trying to find some ways to introduce the dialogue in a different form. Also a comment and a question maybe in the comment as well. As you already mentioned, that people are not really aware in most cases about the dialogue in itself and its form, and how not even in practice, how can we practice it, much less even different forms that you are talking about, the negotiation or the understanding of dialogue, that sometimes the reason of the dialogue doesn't have to even be to reach a consensus, but just the understanding of other participants of the dialogue. And I think it also goes together with that you said that democracy and dialogue is something that needs to be practiced. It's just not an entity that's there, but it's something that needs to be practiced, needs to be taught, and I think that's something that you are also doing in your line of work, and try to introduce these practices also in institutions and in the public sector in Finland. And maybe you can give some few examples of good examples how these practices have been introduced in some fields, and how are they doing, and how are they used in practice?
Yeah. Well, I think we have been very lucky in Finland in that sort of sense that we had a longer history of dialogical practices that started already in the 80s. The first, and all the beginnings are always very small, but they can build up to this bigger movement. The first very concrete context that this kind of dialogical understanding that I'm talking about was practiced, in my understanding, was actually in psychiatric care for treating people with severe psychiatric problems like psychosis. And in the 80s, in the northern part of Lapland, in a very small, relatively small municipality of there, they started in one hospital to, instead of just giving medicines and putting people into hospital wards, they started to invite people who had these psychiatric problems, and their relatives and their family members with the staff of the hospital, just to sit down in a circle and have dialogues in order to plan how this treatment should be done. And they realized that actually having the dialogue was the most effective treatment. And so they become very interested in this kind of open dialogue approach that is now spread wide around the world, at least to 20 different countries. And it started from a very, very small place in northern Finland. And the other context was social work, where they started to also develop dialogues for very difficult situations where they wanted to help families who had lots of challenges in their lives. And again, this was something that started in a small scale and it started to spread out. And now we are in a situation that we have very, very many situations where people are using dialogue. I could give you tons of examples, but maybe something from the public sector. We have lots of municipalities at the moment who are in the administration level, like in city councils or some heads of some administration units are using dialogue, for example, to create their future strategies, how to work in the future, how to use the money of the municipality, how to improve the services, how to involve more citizens in the activities of the municipality. So they're using dialogue in many, many different parts of their administration processes. So they sit down, and instead of having political debates, they take time and focus on dialogue first. Then they might start debating afterwards, but it's usually a better debate because they understand each other better. And also it's been very interesting that that now we have several parts of the government, different ministries, that when they are preparing for new laws or new decrees, they are using dialogue in order to get better understanding about how these laws that they are preparing, how people think about them, how different experts think about them, what might be the consequences for different groups. So we are together with them, we are arranging many different dialogues when we are preparing for some new governmental level programs and also preparing new laws. And during the COVID crisis, we worked with the Finnish government to start national dialogues that anybody could participate and arrange dialogues to hear people's experiences during the crisis. And that has been a really wide and interesting process, we've managed to have so far almost 300 dialogues around Finland. What we did was that we asked people who arranged those dialogues to provide notes, what people have said there, anonymously, obviously, so nobody could be recognized. And we gathered summaries for the government so they could understand better how people in different parts of Finland and different groups in Finland are doing, what are their thoughts, what are their emotions during the pandemic. So many different ways of using dialogue in the public sector, but also I've worked with several different workplaces and organizations who have started to use dialogues as part of their meetings. So instead of having regular meetings, they take some time to have small dialogues in those meetings, just to gain better understanding of the topics that they're dealing with. Like if there's a change in the organization, or if there are new challenges or new work tasks, instead of just making very quick decisions, they take some time to sit down and have a dialogue first, and then afterwards they make decisions based on this better understanding that they can gain through dialogue. So we are, I mean, of course, there's so much work to do even in Finland at the moment, but I think we are in a good moment with dialogue at this stage, because there are like hundreds of organizations that are really using it and finding the benefits and advantages. But I have to emphasize that it started from very little. And then when you have some group of people who have these good experiences and these very concrete examples that how they have used it and why it has been beneficial, then other people start to be interested in also. Yeah, so you need to start from somewhere. Okay, maybe I go to the practical side and then we'll have more time to discuss.
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, so now I'm introducing you to some of the basic principles. I call them ways of dialogue, which are very practical guidelines how to act in a conversation that it's supposed to be dialogue. And I think, again, first, we can only start from ourselves. So the first thing that we can do is that we can try to change our own way of behaving in a dialogue and in a conversation. But also, I think this is also something that we can explain to other people that, okay, this is how, if we want to have a dialogue, maybe we should try to act in these ways. So it would be a more successful dialogue. And based on these 7 ways or 7 principles, we have created the timeout rules, which is one part of the timeout concept that I can maybe say very little in the final part of the lecture. And you can all go online and check it, because all the materials are available in English also. But this is a kind of another way of trying to describe in concrete what it means to be in dialogue. Okay, so first, okay, it's always the first thing in dialogue to focus on listening. And I think that in a dialogical conversation, I'm trying to have this kind of a 2-channel listening. First of all, I think it's very crucial that when we are having a dialogue, when somebody's talking, other people just listen, they don't interrupt, and they don't start to whisper to other people. They're just focusing on listening what that person who is speaking, what is he or she at the moment saying actually? Do I understand what they're saying? But also at the same time, I'm trying to listen to myself. Like, okay, this is what lady is now saying. Okay, what does this bring out in me? What are my thoughts about this topic? What are the things that happen in me when I'm listening to that other person? And I think even this kind of a 2-channel listening is actually quite demanding and needs to be practiced. And in general, I think that we are usually probably inclined to be good at the other one way or the other. We might be quite good at listening other people, but we kind of lose ourselves when we're listening. Or the other way, which is my case, that I'm not necessarily so good at listening to other people, but I'm very good at knowing what I am thinking at the moment. So we need to practice. And this is where I think dialogue always starts. And even, I mean, even if this is the only thing that we try to improve in a conversation, it usually makes the conversation and the dialogue better than in the situation where we don't really focus on listening. So we always start by listening. Okay, then we come to the second way to improve dialogue, is that when we are talking in dialogue, when I am saying something in the dialogical conversation, I try to join what other people have said. In practice, this means that when I'm talking and if lady has said something before me, I say that, okay, well, I was listening to you, lady, I started to think about these things, or I see this thing a bit differently from you, or I'm in complete agreement what you said, or, you know, we are in our way of talking in the conversation, in dialogue, we are constantly referring to what other people are saying. We are joining them. And it doesn't mean that we have to agree what they're saying, but we are acknowledging that we have heard what they have said. And we are trying to join into those things that have already been brought up in the discussion. And again, I've seen so many situations where we have just tried to improve a little bit with this joining part, and it has really changed the dynamics of the discussion. Because I think if we want to invite people to respect each other and pay attention to what other people say, this way usually improves that a lot. Because if I'm in a conversation where I hear constantly that, oh, just coming back to what Kai just had said, or I kind of disagree with Kai, or when Kai said this, I start to think about that. I immediately have this experience that no matter if they're agreeing or disagreeing, at least I'm heard. And what I'm saying seems to be relevant for other people. So this joining part is very crucial, also quite simple, but in practice, of course, not so easy to do in a dialogue. Okay, then when we are having the dialogue and we are there to understand the topic, ourselves and others, it's always very good to ask other people's opinions, their experiences, their points of view, ask them to specify what they meant if I haven't understood. Or when I'm talking, I'm explaining my point of view to the topic. If I'm explaining what courage means to me, or if I'm explaining what happened to me during last Tuesday's biology class when we started to have a big argument in the classroom, I'm saying that, okay, this is what happened to me, or this is how I see the things, but how about you? How do you see it? You can ask directly from the other people. But also from time to time, it's good to ask directly, like, okay, how does Yeva see this, or how does Laide see this, or you know, so we are there not just throwing things in the air, we are aiming at them to the other participants. It's very funny actually, because in Finland, I know that in many workplaces, because I do lots of workplace supervision and coaching, I hear lots of people talking about the team that they're working with on a very kind of a general level, that, oh, people are so exhausted in this team at the moment, or there's lots of tension here. But they don't say directly that, okay, hey, you, my colleague, it seems that you have been quite stressed out lately. Tell me what's going on. But also the positive things might be said in a very vague way. Like, I was so happy last week when Yeva came to help me, instead of saying, Yeva, I really appreciated last week the help that you gave me. So the energy is very different in dialogue if we are trying to be very direct in the way that we talk and ask of other people about their points of view or their experiences. Okay, so then if we really are trying to respect equality in the dialogical situation, try to maximize it, we are constantly trying to create a common language. And this has many levels. First of all, I think it starts by trying to use these kind of words, those kind of words that I'm quite sure that everybody who's participating understands. Because if I'm using words or expressions or some kind of a technical jargon, I'm not then inviting people to dialogue. I'm actually kind of usually putting myself up, making myself somehow better or smarter than the other people. So we're trying to use that common language that everybody who's participating would understand. And I think this is crucial in many situations, especially if we have, for example, children in the dialogue. We need to try to talk in a way that the children also can participate and understand what we're talking about. But I think it very often happens in my work when I'm working for quite a lot with, for example, social workers. And when they're meeting their clients, ordinary citizens, they, in many situations, they just don't realize that they're using words that the people, their clients, don't actually understand, these technical terms or some kind of a professional language that they're using without realizing that this is not a common language for everybody. But also I think it's good in a dialogue to create common language, because sometimes when we are having a dialogue, we start to talk about using metaphors or using some sort of expression that we kind of invent or make up in that particular conversation. For example, if I use my imaginary case of the classroom in a school having a dialogue about the argument in the biology class, some of the students might, for example, say that, yeah, I think we started to act like a group of monkeys. And then somebody else in the conversations might pick up that metaphor of group of monkeys and start to talk about, yeah, but I think the monkey group was doing this and that. So this metaphor of acting like a group of monkeys might become a great way of having the dialogue and building this common understanding about what happened in that particular situation. So in a dialogue, we also create, not just use, but we try to create common new language for that situation, for better understanding. And then, of course, this is the most difficult part, at least for me, and the most challenging part, that if we are having the dialogue where we really want to understand differences, we want to see why and how and for what reasons other people see the same topic differently from me, we are kind of also somehow inviting tensions, and they usually arise if we are having a good dialogue, if we are not too polite all the time in a wrong way. But in a dialogue, the most relieving thing, for me at least, is that we don't need to solve the tensions. It's just enough that we explore them. It's like that, okay, this seems to be the big misunderstanding, or this seems to be the big disagreement between us. Let's not try to solve it. Let's not decide who is right, who is wrong. Let's just explore it. Let's start to work on it. Let's start to see how much better understanding we can gain of these differences and tensions. And I think when we are relieving ourselves, giving the permission that, okay, in a dialogue, I mean, we don't need to solve it. Maybe we need to solve it after the dialogue, but not in the dialogical discussion. Then we are free just to explore. And usually then when I hear in practice what this means is that when I hear somebody saying something that I find very difficult to accept or difficult to even understand, instead of trying to argue with that person, I'll just say, hey, I'm not quite sure what you said, or I think I strongly disagree. Please tell me more. Let's explore. Tell me more, why do you see this thing in that way? Then I can explain my point of view. So it's about exploring and working out what are the differences, what are the tensions. But this, again, is not an easy part. But I think the more we get experiences of being able to do that with different people, and we have experienced it, that it was a way of learning, then we become more courageous in exploring these sort of things. Okay, a couple of more points. Okay. In almost all dialogues that I have been, it's very common, and this is a kind of a general way how just human communication happens, is that we start to focus in the discussion at some things, or very often also it starts by some people being more active in the discussion. And that's good. We get started, we are going somewhere. But then it's usually good to stop at some point and just actively search for things that are hidden. In that sort of way, things that might be relevant for our discussions, but have not been said yet. So in practice, it just means that we just ask the question in general, okay, we have been now having the dialogue for 40 minutes. Is there something that we haven't said yet? Is there something that we have avoided so far? Is there something that we should be talking about? And again, if some people have been very silent during the dialogue, we might ask them that, okay, I mean, there are at least 2-3 people who haven't said really much. So it would be interesting to know what's going on in your mind. So then these kind of a more hidden things might emerge in the dialogue. And by hidden, I don't mean necessarily that it's something that people don't want to talk about. Sometimes it is, but very often it's that because we just started to go to some direction, we didn't have yet time to explore other possibilities. And again, maybe the classroom situation, the question could be that, okay, we have heard now from like most of you, but it would be still nice to hear those people who haven't talked about, or we have only started to talk about now about the group of monkeys. Is there some other way of seeing this thing, this argument that happened in the biology class than just the activities of group of monkeys? So we can use whatever kind of questions that seem relevant for finding out things that haven't been yet said. And then in the end, not necessarily in the end, but this happens usually in the kind of a latter part of dialogue, is that we can start to examine the bigger picture. And this means that when people have said their different points of view, they've explained why they see the topic in their own way, what's relevant for them, we can start to explore and examine the bigger picture. That, okay, we have now heard what everybody has been thinking about this. Let's see, for example, what are the big things that we agree on? What seems to be the things that we are mostly agreeing on? And what are the main disagreements? This is one way of looking at the bigger picture. Other way is also to say that, okay, we have been talking about this topic now, the topic of what do we mean by justice, for example, and each of you have brought out different points of view. Is there some bigger picture where all these points of view are actually contributing to? So we're trying to see that, is there something that in the topic that we're talking about, is there something that none of us can see from our own perspective? But if we look at all the perspectives together, we start to see something bigger. Very often, for example, when I work with social workers and we are talking about some difficult client situations of theirs, and if they're all, for example, working with the same client, after a dialogue of 30 minutes, we might start to see some of the things in that client situations that none of them could have seen from their point of view. But when we kind of add the dots together, we start to see the bigger picture. We start to see some kind of, for example, some behavior pattern in the client's way of acting that none of them can see from their individual point of view. But when we put all these together, we start to see, for example, that this client always, for example, starts the work by being very motivated, but after 2 weeks, something happens and the motivation is gone. And when we look at this from different points of view of the social workers, we might start to see why this happened. What is the pattern behind this? But none of them could see it from their point of view. So there were lots of different ways that we could see and examine the bigger picture in dialogue. And now I put all these together, and these, as I said, these can be also presented as rules for dialogue. They can also be presented as a description of an ideal dialogue. And I think that in many good dialogues, not necessarily all of them need to be present, but I think that if we take small steps, even in the first one, that we try to listen to each other a bit better and try to understand each other through listening, that usually makes the communication in that situation much better than it would have been if we wouldn't be practicing or taking efforts in listening. And I use this is just one way of describing dialogue, but I use this very often with these groups of people who are not yet familiar what I mean by dialogue. I'll just tell that, okay, this is the way that I hope that we could try to discuss today. And then I maybe explain something of this, or maybe I'll tell just the 3 first ones if it's a group that really needs to start from a very beginning. And usually people say, and then I ask, does it sound, if we're trying to learn and understand, are these reasonable ways to do it? Usually people agree, and then we'll just try to act in this way and see what happens. Usually, as I mentioned, usually it is a good experience for most of the people who are participating. And that's the first step. And then people can get better. And I think that if we would live in a society where we would know the differences between debating, negotiating, and having a dialogue, it would be so much easier, because then when we would say that, okay, let's have a dialogue, everybody would know that, okay, it means that we try to listen, we're joining more, we ask questions, we use common language, we are there to explore differences and tensions, we are trying to search for the hidden and try to see the bigger picture. We would be more or less on the same page at least. But now I think the problem in many situations is that if we want to have a dialogue, most people just don't understand what we are practically trying to do. So they start having debates and arguments, or they start negotiating. And then that way, without knowing, they end up destroying the dialogue. Okay, this is my presentation. We'll still have 30 minutes for discussion and questions. Should I leave the slide here, or is it easier if I take it away? What do you think?
I think you can still leave it there.
Yeah.
Just so that's visible for everyone.
Yeah, I think it works as a summary what we were talking about.
Exactly. Yeah, my first question would be to start out this question and answer section of this lecture. As far as I understand and how you described it, this method, or rather a collection of methods of dialogue, is sort of a toolkit, sort of a framing of a way to communicate. Does it call for a facilitator or a leader of this sort of a conversation, especially if not all of the participants are aware of the dialogue as a form of communication?
Not necessarily, but in many cases, it helps a lot. I think, because as I said, the timeout method that you can, if you want to check out, it's, you can just Google timeout foundation timeout rules. You will find it, all the materials also in English. One of the basic ideas that we create, based on these ways to dialogue, we created the rules, which are more or less same things, but in a bit different format. And I think the crucial thing usually is that you have some sort of agreement what we are trying to do, how we are trying to communicate. And then it doesn't necessarily require that somebody is the facilitator if everybody can look at the same rules or same principles and say, agree that, okay, let's try to more or less have the discussion according to these. But I think, especially in situations where there's tensions or people are not very inclined to dialogue, or somehow it's not so obvious that they will succeed in following these ways, then it's good to have a facilitator, somebody whose responsibility is to try to make sure and encourage and show example that it's more a dialogue than not. And I always say that we never have a perfect dialogue. I think it's more or less a good practice. And even small steps are usually very beneficial for the outcomes. But I think facilitator, I mean, especially because, I mean, the biggest problem why I think facilitator is needed is that it's very difficult for us to treat each other as equals. In a discussion, it usually means that in almost any group, we have people who are quite good at taking the space and talking a lot, and they don't necessarily, I'm like that. I don't necessarily give the space to other people unless somebody is there to remind me that, Kai, you've probably said enough now. Let's hear what other people have to say. So I think the facilitator is there to use power in a positive way to protect the equality in the discussion. So again, it is possible to do it without a facilitator, but in many cases, the facilitator really helps. And also some cases, it's absolutely required to make it happen, that the conversation is a real dialogue.
And imagining if you are a facilitator or someone who practices this method, and there is this moment in a dialogue where a discussion becomes wild, where there's some tension growing, what would you do? Is there any suggestion or any tool in this toolkit that you would use?
Yeah, well, we have used, I mean, the one part of the timeout concept was creating these cards for facilitator to deal in different situations. And this is one of the most common things. And I think the crucial thing, if you are the facilitator of a dialogue, I think it's very important that in the beginning, before anything happens, in the beginning of the discussion, you kind of reserve the right to disrupt people and limit the way that they're talking, and also the right to stop the discussion for a while. Because if it becomes too heated, I think as a facilitator, you can say that, okay, now I realize it's becoming quite heated, so maybe we should take a small break, 2 minutes or 5 minutes, grab a cup of coffee and walk a bit, and then let's try to calm down a bit and continue in the dialogical mode. Or if I see that somebody is taking a lot of space, I might say as a facilitator, okay, I said in the beginning that I might interrupt you just in order to make sure that everybody's heard here. So please, if you can limit now a little bit what you're saying, and I will give the turn to other people. So kind of as a facilitator, you anticipate what are the risks or challenges. And in the beginning, you tell people that this is something that I might do here. Is it okay for you? And and usually people, if they have come and agreed to be in a dialogue, they usually agree. So what we have tried to do is that we have tried to create very practical guidelines for facilitators how to act in these challenging situations in a way that you are not humiliating anybody. Because if I'm the person who talks too much, usually it's not nice to be humiliated. I like the facilitator to say it in a constructive and nice way. So we have also kind of even make these example sentences, how you can, in a polite but very firm way, to guide these people who talk too much, for example. But I emphasize that it's good that you explain people a little bit beforehand how you act as a facilitator, and you do it in order to guarantee and protect the equality.
So it means that all the participants of the dialogue should be willing and knowing what they're about to do, and willing to come to some kind of common understanding.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is the most important thing, and this is probably the reason why we fail in dialogues, that we don't first agree on the rules in that sort of sense. We mix it up with other forms of discussion. We mix it up with debating, or we mix it up with negotiating, or also there are some approaches to dialogue that emphasize consensus. But for me, that's also a bit dangerous, because I think if we are aiming at consensus, I mean, that's usually too big aim, and it's not necessarily for us to agree on everything to be able to live together. So I think it's so crucial that people would understand more that, okay, there is a very specific way of having a conversation called dialogue, and it means more or less something like this. And then when you explain this to people and you explain why this might be a good way of having the discussion, then they can try to become good team players in dialogue. I always say that dialogue is you need everybody to be at least willing to try it out. If somebody says that, no, I don't want to, I think this is completely crap, and I'm not gonna try to do it this way, then it's not possible to have a dialogue.
Is there a limit of number of people who could participate in a dialogue where it's still valid? Everybody could be able to express their opinion and listen to.
Well, I think it very much depends on the time also, and also the situation. I mean, I think the ideal group is somewhere between 6 and 12 people. And if you have more or less like 90 minutes or 2 hours, that usually gives everybody the space to participate almost as much as they want. But then, I mean, if you have bigger groups, then you just need to divide them in smaller groups from time to time so everybody can participate, and then bring people back together to share what they have said in smaller groups, or put them to discuss for a while in pairs or whatever. So there are lots of different techniques that you can use as a facilitator to deal with bigger groups. We have arranged now very, very big kind of a dialogue events also in Finland. And I think the biggest one was last autumn, where there were like 300 participants in the same dialogue, but obviously they were divided in smaller groups most of the time. So there are different ways of doing that. I think it would look very similar to LAMPA in that sort of sense, that you would have lots of different dialogues going on in different tents. And then maybe everybody could then bring something for their group to the bigger one. I don't know. There's so many ways of doing it, but I don't think there's a kind of an absolute maximum or minimum. Well, I suppose you need 2 for dialogue mostly, but have a minimum. But it depends what you're aiming at and what you feel is relevant. And in many events, in bigger events, I just might to do that. There might be, if I'm giving a lecture, for example, that I want to add dialogical elements, I usually ask people to talk with somebody who is close to them, and then we have this audience-me dialogue. But from time to time, everybody has the opportunity at least to say something to somebody. And that's one way of having a dialogue. But mostly I'm thinking of these groups of 6 to 12 people.
Okay. In your opinion, how important it is for the participants to feel safe in the dialogue, and what would be your suggestions to make this dialogue experience as a safe place?
it's very crucial, obviously, that people feel safe, because the most important thing for understanding is that people share their own experiences, that they tell why do they see this topic in a certain way. And it's always more or less telling about your experiences. And in order for you to talk about your experiences as you need to be relatively safe. And usually what gives kind of enhances the feeling of being safe is those that you know what's going on. So these kind of principles or rules, you understand that, okay, this is what we're trying to do. Maybe I can participate with my experiences because this is what we're doing. Nobody is here to judge me, for example. They are here to understand me. And then, of course, the way that the facilitator behaves is super important. And in practice, I think it just means that if I'm the facilitator and I have 10 people or 20 people, I try to, when they come in, I'll greet everybody. I'll make everybody to introduce themselves. If it's a bigger group, I ask them first to talk in pairs, because it usually brings more safety. That I had this small discussion already with this person and he was or she was okay. So there are different ways of building the safety of the group. But I think it has to start with the understanding what we're doing here. And usually people think that, okay, these rules or these principles are quite good. And they give this idea that this probably is a relatively safe discussion. So yeah, that's the most important thing that you need to work on in the beginning, to create this atmosphere of safety. But at the same time, I'm emphasizing that we are also there to touch the difficult issues. So we need to be prepared that, okay, we might get a little bit upset also, and we might feel offended sometimes, but we are there to understand and explore. So we can't be there completely just to make sure that everybody's super, super safe all the time. We also, and in order to learn more, we need excitement and a little bit of danger. So I think ideal dialogue is a kind of a good combination of safety and excitement, or safety and danger.
Kai, as you already mentioned, it's very important that people share their own experiences about a topic, whatever it might be. Are there any suggestions how to formulate the topic or open up the topic so that it's understandable for everyone and encourages people to share?
Well, something that we use quite often is that if the topic is already decided, that, okay, we are here to talk about what would be a good example? I mean, now we have had so many. Well, for example, in Finland, they used dialogue in order to get better understanding about how people are feeling about wolves in Finland, because more wolves are coming and they are protected and people are afraid of them. So they invited people into these wolf dialogues, and they were very successful. And people know that, okay, they're, hunters have different opinions from farmers and people who are working for the environmental organizations, so wanting to protect animals, they have different opinions. So in order to encourage this, to talk about your experiences, of course, it's important to say that we want to hear not just your opinions, we want to hear the experiences behind the opinions. If you are afraid of wolves, or if you want to protect wolves, or if you want to limit their number, explain us what's behind. Why do you think so? What are the experiences? And then again, very often I might start the dialogue by saying something about where do I come from, what I have thought about, what is my understanding of the situation, and then I usually have very specific questions. Let's be in pairs, for example, and tell the other person what was your latest encounter with a wolf, or what has been the last situation where you have been thinking about wolves, or whatever. So you as a facilitator, you encourage and you guide people to talk about their experiences, And you also encourage other people to be curious about different experiences. And there are many, many different ways to do that. But when people talk about the experiences behind their opinions, they usually become quite curious, even though they would disagree. They're like, okay, but I haven't thought about this. I didn't know that this is behind your opinion. And some situations you kind of, because very often people, especially if we are talking about like more kind of a practical political questions, people are talking very much about their thoughts, but not necessarily, for example, about their emotions or their memories. Or so you need to also activate different dimensions of experience. You might ask that, okay, Lydia, now I've heard so much you talk about how do you think about this, but how do you feel about this? Is this, so you kind of encourage people, you're curious as a facilitator. Tell me more, and what was the last time you encountered this question? Or you said something about your mother's experiences. Tell me more about that. So you kind of, you invite people to open up, why do they see, what is their perspective, what's behind it. And when this kind of talk about experiences starts to happen in dialogue, it's usually very energizing and people start to join in, because somehow we start to see each other as human beings. And I think when that starts to happen, then usually we are in a good place from a dialogical point of view. But it usually, from time to time, you need an effort for people to start to open up. And I don't mean that they need to be super personal all the time. They just need to talk more than just about their opinions, something more about themselves and their experiences.
Thank you, Kai. And what's your opinion on how important is the diversity in the group? If we really are using the dialogue to come to some kind of understanding or understanding each other or the topic or whatever, then creating these groups of dialogue, and how important is the diversity, and how can you create a diverse enough group, or is it even important?
Well, again, I think it depends on the situation. I mean, if it's a dialogue that we are having in my workplace or in my classroom, I mean, then we are working in the diversity of us. And I think even in those situations where I would know everybody in a dialogue, we are also trying to learn new things of those people that we know quite well already. So we're trying to enhance the diversity even with the people that we know. But if we really are trying to use dialogue in a process where we try to get a better understanding, and it's always usually very beneficial to have somebody, at least one person there, who somehow comes with a different voice, because it usually brings up new things in others as well. So one of my mentors, Tom Arnchill, who is already retired, who was one of these original people developing dialogue in social work, he says that very often if the situation is very locked up, it's good to invite somebody from the outside just to participate, because it usually just have another voice, a strange voice in the dialogue, kind of moves it a little bit. So I think we should try to, if it's possible, to somehow boost the diversity. But again, it's not something that it's necessary. We can have good dialogues even in groups that are not so diverse. And I think we should do that more, because I assume that we are actually more diverse than we usually think. Because one of the things that dialogue brings up is that some people that I think that I've known already what they're thinking about might turn out to be quite different when we are having a proper dialogue.
Yeah, I guess it opens up a curiosity about each other also within a group that we believe that we know quite well.
Yeah, and then sometimes it can be also quite upsetting that I thought that everybody was in agreement with this, but then I realized they were not when we really start to talk about it. So yeah, but I think also what we have tried to do quite a lot is that we have also tried to, I don't think the best way is try to create dialogues where people who are in completely hateful or disagreement with each other come to the situation. But I think it would be usually better to kind of bring some sort of diversity to the group. So we can at least kind of open up the setting a little bit. So because in Finland, I think very often people fantasize that we should be able to put the opposites to dialogue, but I don't think that's always a good idea, and I don't think that's even necessary for democracy as such. I think we just need lots of different dialogues that we can at least carry these different experiences to different settings. So yeah, just I would take small steps in boosting diversity in dialogues at first, and then maybe later take more challenging situations. Yeah.
How do you conclude the dialogue after all the sharing, after looking at the bigger picture? How do you come out of this conversation?
Well, it depends what we're going to do next. I mean, if it's a group of people that are just there for the dialogue and they will never meet each other in that setting again, I'll usually just ask that, okay, what has been relevant for you in this discussion? Like, what has happened to your understanding? Just to kind of let people to say something, how has it been? But then if we are supposed to do something together, then the concluding question is that, okay, now we had the dialogue, what next? How should we use this? What was relevant for our, cooperation in the future? Or what is the next concrete step then? Who should know about these discussions? Is there something that we already understand that we should do? So the dialogue might in the end turn into negotiating, for example, that, okay, we have now had a dialogue and we have to decide something. So what do you think we should decide based on the dialogue or the better understanding? Yeah, but my favorite question very often is if it's a dialogue that doesn't necessarily lead to anything very concrete, is that, okay, have we talked about the right things in the right way? Or just ask that, how was this discussion for you? Because I think people usually also have the need to say not something just about the topic, but also something about the dialogue as an experience.
Well, thank you, Kai, really, for the insight in this method, or all the toolbox of methods rather than just one method. And yes, I think this lecture really opened up the idea of having a conversation between people about some sort of a topic, and not necessarily having an aim to have a consensus in the end, but rather to use this conversation, to use this dialogue to move forward some understanding within themselves or within the topic or within the group. So really, Kai, thank you. I really appreciate you participating in our conversation, Skola LAMPA. And for the viewers, I just want to remind that the recording of this lecture will be available on our webpage, Festivals LAMPA, as well as this event and Facebook, and later on YouTube and also Spotify. So thank you, Kai, again.
Thank you for inviting me.
Good evening, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.